MSI's new Alpha 15 gaming laptop uses AMD's latest Radeon RX 5500M graphics. But just how well does this actually perform in games? I've tested 21 games at all setting levels and also compared the Alpha 15 against other gaming laptops to see what the differences are. I've got the A3 DDK version of the Alpha 15, so there's an AMD Ryzen 7 3750H CPU, the new Radeon RX 5500M graphics, 16GB of memory and dual channel, and a 1080p 144Hz screen with G-Sync. It's also available with 240Hz, or a cheaper A3DD model with small changes. You can find updated prices to both linked in the description. The MSI Dragon Center software allows us to set different performance profiles. I've tested with the highest extreme performance mode and the fan set to max speed for best performance. We'll only be covering gaming performance in this video, so if you're new to the channel, you'll definitely want to get subscribed for the upcoming thermal testing, full review, and future comparisons against Nvidia-based laptops. Let's start out by going through all games at all setting levels, then afterwards we'll see how the Alpha 15 compares with some other laptops. Red Dead Redemption 2 was tested using the game's built-in benchmark, as Gamers Nexus found that overall it provides a pretty fair representation of actual gameplay. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible to test with all settings maxed out at Ultra due to the 4GB VRAM limit of the 5500M. However, medium settings was only just below 60 FPS. Battlefield 5 was tested in campaign mode, and it was playing well with the high setting preset, which was able to average above 60 FPS, with low settings just able to surpass 100 FPS. So definitely a playable experience. Control was playing okay with medium settings, however I think it still looks pretty good with the low setting preset, and this was performing significantly better, where the 1% low result was above the average FPS from medium settings. Borderlands 3 was tested using the game's built-in benchmark tool, and the top two settings were performing pretty poorly compared to the others due to the 4GB VRAM limitation of the 5500M. However, medium settings was still able to average 60 FPS. Apex Legends was tested with either all settings at maximum or all settings at the lowest possible values, as it doesn't have predefined setting presets. It still played well at max settings, with above 60 FPS for the 1% low. However, for a competitive first-person shooter like this, I'd stick to lower settings to get that frame rate up. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the built-in benchmark, and the results were alright with the magic 60 FPS average being hit even with the high setting preset, but we'll take a look at how this laptop compares with others in this game shortly. Ghost Recon Breakpoint was also tested with the benchmark tool. Higher settings in this test performed poorly due to the 4GB VRAM limit of the 5500M, but also due to the Ryzen CPU, as I've had higher 1% low performance from a 1650 i7 combination. Far Cry New Dawn was tested with the built-in benchmark. I've found this to be more of a CPU-heavy game, so the frame rates are down a little compared to some Intel-based laptops with lower-powered 1650 graphics. Fortnite was tested with the replay feature, and medium settings was needed if we wanted to get a frame rate closer to the refresh rate of the display. However, Epic settings was still playing fairly with over 60 FPS even for the 1% low. Overwatch is another well-optimized game and was tested in the practice range. Although it was still very playable at maximum settings, low settings was able to surpass 200 FPS, which could potentially make the 240Hz screen upgrade option more useful. Dota 2 was tested playing in the middle lane, and as a primarily CPU-heavy game, the results are likely more restricted by the Ryzen 7 3750H than the 5500M. That said, over 100 FPS at ultra settings is still extremely playable without issue. CSGO was tested using the Uletical FPS benchmark, and is another that seems to depend more on CPU power than the GPU. The results are about 50 to 100 FPS lower than an Intel-based laptop with similar GPU power, but again, still playable without issue. Rainbow Six Siege was tested with the built-in benchmark. This test generally scores quite well on modern gaming laptops, so seeing almost 100 FPS at ultra settings was no surprise, with much higher possible at lower settings. Metro Exodus was tested using the built-in benchmark. Most parts of the game perform a fair bit better than this, so don't take these results as a good indication of what to expect throughout the entire game. It's more of a worst case. The Division 2 was also tested with the built-in benchmark, and high settings were needed to maintain above 60 FPS. However, low settings was still capable of easily passing 100 FPS. PUBG was tested using the replay feature, and ultra settings was still able to run over 60 FPS in my test. Again, higher than 100 FPS with the lowest settings, with a fair 1% low result, so it's actually running fairly well. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was tested with the built-in benchmark, and as a test that's quite heavy on the CPU compared to other games, the lower frame rates here are expected as a result of the 3750H. But to be fair, this game doesn't need mega high FPS to enjoy. Watch Dogs 2 is a resource-heavy game, and I can play it fine with a stable 30 FPS. However, once we go to high settings or above, the 1% low drops like a brick as the game starts stuttering quite a bit and becomes unplayable, but it was fine at medium and low. The Witcher 3 on the other hand was fairly playable with ultra settings, but the frame rate improvement of stepping down to high settings for a 32% higher average FPS seems worthwhile to me, given it still looks quite good, but now even the 1% low is close to 60 FPS. F1 2019 was tested using the game's benchmark tool, and is similar in that regard, where there's a larger improvement stepping down just one setting level from maximum. Despite that, 60 FPS averages was still possible at ultra high, however 100 plus was achieved at any other setting. Strange Brigade was tested with Vulkan, again with the built-in benchmark. This test doesn't really need high-end specs to perform well, so above 60 FPS at ultra settings was no surprise. Let's also take a look at how this config of the MSI Alpha 15 compares with other laptops. Use these results as a rough guide only, as they were tested at different times with different drivers. In Battlefield 5, I've got the Alpha 15 highlighted in red near similarly performing machines. We can see that it's easily ahead of Nvidia's 1650 graphics as expected. However, it's coming in below all the 1660 Ti laptops that I've tested so far, even the 1660 Ti Max-Q models. The Asus GA502DU just above it should be somewhat comparable, as both laptops have the same Ryzen CPU, with the key difference being the GPU. These are the results from Far Cry 5 with ultra settings in the built-in benchmark. Again, the Alpha 15 with 5500M graphics is placing between the Nvidia GTX 1650 and 1660 Ti Max-Q graphics. To be fair though, I found this to be more of a CPU-bound test, which probably explains why the Aorus 5 with i7 isn't too far behind, with slightly better 1% low performance. These are the results from Shadow of the Tomb Raider with the built-in benchmark at highest settings. The performance is again somewhere between the 1650 and 1660 Ti laptops, similar to what we saw in the last couple of games. But I'm planning on comparing these three GPUs in a future video in more than 15 games, so make sure you're subscribed for that one. Overall, the gaming performance from the MSI Alpha 15 was definitely acceptable. For the most part, the 5500M is comfortably beating Nvidia's 1650 and offering a playable experience in modern games with fair settings. This is nice to see. I've shown that the 1660 Ti is almost 50% faster than the 1650 on average, so there's a big gap between the two. Now that AMD are filling this with the 5500M, you can bet that Nvidia will probably put something out too. The Ryzen 7 3750H is holding it back a bit in some instances, but it really depends on the game. As I've shown in the past, even a last generation Intel i5 8300H CPU can comfortably beat the 3750H. Games like CSGO and Dota are obviously behind due to the lower CPU power, but in most others, the 5500M is doing pretty well. I'll be interested to get my hands on a laptop that pairs it with an Intel CPU, or otherwise when AMD release Zen 2 mobile CPUs next year. I found it interesting that the Alpha 15 is available with 240Hz screen, considering even at minimum settings, only one game, Overwatch, was able to surpass 200 FPS averages. Based on this, unless you're planning on playing below 1080p, I don't think it's worth paying extra for 240Hz with the 5500M. As a 1650 competitor, the 5500M is looking decent. Both even have 4GB of VRAM, so there are similar limitations in regards to using higher setting levels. In the end, it will come down to price differences. And as there aren't many 5500M laptops out yet, we should probably wait for some more before drawing a conclusion. At the moment though, the Alpha 15 is looking a little pricey when we consider that the Helios 300 with 1660 Ti can go on sale for $999 US. Let me know what you thought of the gaming performance from the MSI Alpha 15 gaming laptop down in the comments. I'll test out thermals in depth in an upcoming video, and the full review is still to come. So if you're new to the channel, consider getting subscribed for those, as well as future tech videos like this one.